John Safran, thank you so much for joining me. I've been a fan for many years of your stuff. Actually, I just think you've created the coolest career for yourself. Really, just kind of a combination of just all the subjects that I find incredibly interesting: writing, journalism, and of course comedy, all into one. Yeah, thanks for all the stuff you do. It's great.
I guess I've sometimes I forget that I've invented my professions. So, for
Yeah.
instance, I was never a documentary maker until I was a documentary maker, and probably 6 months before I was a documentary maker, it had never occurred to me to be a documentary maker. It's just an opportunity arrived where the ABC put out a promotion saying they're looking for eight young people who've never been in the media before to shoot some, documentaries for a show. And I'm not even sure how many documentaries I'd even seen. I mean, I'm sure I had. I would have had to have seen some documentaries, but I definitely never like ruminated over the idea of, yes, this is going to be my future. And then it just became that. And then I just decided I wanted to be a true crime writer. And so I became a true crime writer. And I hadn't read any true crime books before.
Mm.
Uh, Again, an opportunity arose, which I mean, that's a bit tacky because it does involve a murder. Uh, I'm talking about my first book, Murder in Mississippi, where
Yep. Yep.
I hung out with a white supremacist when I was still a documentary comedian. 10 months before I became a true crime writer, I was hanging out with a white supremacist in Mississippi for a little prank documentary story. And anyway, he started legal action against the ABC, so we could never broadcast it. And but then I'm back home, and it was 11 months later, so not even a year later, and I find out he's been murdered by, or at
Oh.
least killed by a young black dude who claims that this white supremacist hit on him and he had to defend himself. I was like, what the hell, or whatever. And then I was like, it just felt like I should be covering this in somehow, but like it takes ages to get funding and the practicalities of filming TV or whatever. And then I just had this because this was pre the true crime revival. You know how there was that podcast Serial,
Yeah.
and then
Yep.
suddenly everything exploded. Something like true crime's like the biggest thing in the world, or at least this neo or whatever new true crime, and this more what would you even call it? I guess not casual true crime, but sort of amateur true crime, where it's like, well, I've never done a true crime thing before this. But anyway, so God damn it. I was before, this is like before Serial. So it was a bit weird that, like, why the hell are you doing a true crime book? Like, that's up. And so anyway, so then when I had this kind of idea to do a true crime book, and I hadn't read any true crime books. Sorry, that's not true. I was just coincidentally was reading In Cold Blood
Great book.
by
Great
Truman
book.
Capote. And then
Mm.
and I read Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, because on like Amazon it said, if you like this, you'll like this. So I started reading that, and something clicked when I was reading Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, because that's set in the South, and I was going, oh my god, I should do something like this, because true crime writing can be a bit like my documentary work, where it's like I'm an outsider, a fish out of water, and I go into a town that's like the contradictory culture to mine, and I'm like snooping around, and I was like, oh my god, and I was like, all I need is a murder, like, and I and and so I was really looking like doing a bit of Australia's Got Talent, but on murders, where I was searching out a murder, and like, for instance, I think I met up with Father Bob, for instance, because I knew he knew something like that. I was like, and then this is how like dumb I can be. I'm reading this book that's set in the South in America, and I'm going, oh, I'd love to investigate a murder, but I need a murder. And it took me weeks for it to click. Oh, that's right. I know that white supremacist in the South, in America, who was murdered. And so, and then as soon as I clicked on that, I was like, I just have to get over there. Like the trial's not going to wait for me. And so I just bought a ticket off my own bat and just had my like audio recorder and a notebook. And I think I spent like a month there or something. I don't know. And then the case got delayed. So then I came back and I had just all this material because I'd been going through all the files there. And then, yeah, then I went to Penguin Books. Like I went to pitch it around. I went to Penguin Books. I'm in their boardroom. I've got my big box of FBI files from Mississippi, and like looking like a lunatic. And then they're like, "Oh, yeah, do this, yeah." And so therefore, I guess the point of that is like suddenly I'm a true crime writer, but I just like made it up. And
I mean,
there's all these things I just make up. Like for instance, I really liked My Reality on Music Jamboree, which was this show, and it was very theatrical. There was lots of like me dressing up. I really liked that stuff, but you know, I've also got to take in mind what people like from me. So people seem to like from me when I do a bit of legit journalism, and then I twist it. They don't like it when I'm just doing a performance silly. Like I don't think I can quite pull that off, or there's not really the audience for that. So yeah, blah 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 blah.
I mean, you're kind of talking about doing true crime before true crime really blew up, but I kind of feel like you know, the first time I came across you was John Safran Vs God, and now we've kind of got this like I don't know, funny category of, I guess, journalism with like Louis Theroux. You've got I forget that New Zealand guy's name who does Dark Tourist, which is a great show on Netflix.
David Farrier.
That's it. Yeah. I feel like you're
both
kind
my
of
friends. Both my friends.
Great.
Yeah.
You're kind of
both met them in real life.
OG, the original kind of.
Oh no, I think Louis Theroux was before me or whatever. But yeah, I mean, the other context for me is, just so if anyone watches my old work, is that it was before, you know, like it was a touch before things like Ali G or Jackass or
right.
So yeah, it is kind of weird that sort of like, having said that, that style has been done in previous generations. So I'm not pretending. And I kind of lent towards that. So, and I was aware of that. So I'm not pretending, I'm not saying I made up anything or whatever like that. I'm just saying it was kind of like curious at around the same time. And this was, even though technically speaking, there was the internet, it wasn't like it is now, it wasn't social media or whatever. It was like, for instance, if people were like, "Oh, John, there's this Michael Moore film you've got to see," even though technically speaking, the internet was up, they wouldn't give you a link. They'd give you a dub of a VHS, like that they got from their friend in America who'd come over on an airplane or whatever. So just even though I wasn't really aware, I wasn't aware of Michael Moore, but he had done this film called Roger and Me, where he's chasing after the head of General Motors or whatever. So, but I wasn't aware of that when I started doing my stuff. And then, then it was weird that just in different places in the world, there was obviously like something going through the atmosphere of like social satire pranking has to become a thing again. And then suddenly there's like Ali G, and there's Chris Morris in the UK, and there was me in Australia, and it was just kind of a thing. Of course, now it's like I can't really do that anymore unless I came up with a really killer idea, because everything's that now. Right. like YouTube is that. YouTube is, a lot of it is social experiments and you know, silly vox pops and all that kind of jazz, which is totally cool or whatever. I'm not complaining about it. It just means you have to zig when the others zag. Like
sure.
I can't be like dressing up as a ferret and turning up on the steps of Parliament and expecting anyone not to go, Jesus Christ, where did it all go wrong for John? Which is like, why? Yeah, which is like for instance, like that's really part of the reason, like my new book is like, so thoroughly journalistic. And then I put all my silly stuff on it. It is sort of reacting, like making sure, you know, I'm zigging.
Yeah.
And not be, and I have to do that on a practical, and it's not only on an artistic level. It's like, this is my job. Like, I've backed myself in a corner where my job is to get projects up, based on me being the lead character in some way, protagonist. Like, that's all. No one wants me on any other level than that. And then, so yeah, I talk to my dad. My dad brings this up with me. He goes, I cannot believe you've managed to sustain this career. It's like amazing, because they are so far that I've always had something else lined up next, but it's like, it's pretty, it's like my dad would prefer if it was like the olden days where, you know, like I had a job at the ABC, you know, where I turn up to the office, you know, like where it's just more stable, like than that. But yeah, it is kind of strange how, because I haven't come up with really, unless you're going to say I'm the franchise, I'm the franchise, unless you're going to say I'm the franchise, like I haven't come up with anything easy where it's like, well, okay, I've done that, now I'll do season 2 of that, now I'll do season, like every time I have to like come up with something new, like like my books, like one's a true crime in Mississippi, one's more gonzo journalism about extremists in Australia. So I get some same.
I just finished that.
Yeah,
I just finished that book, and I've just started Puff Piece as well. But you know, just reading Depends What You Mean by Extremist was one of the reasons I really wanted to kind of reach out to you, because I've also just been getting really sucked in as an observer of kind of extremism, and your book is just is a really fun read. Absolutely loved it. But I mean, that must have been like a really wild thing. I mean, you seem to always do this, like just hang around with the wrong crowd, I think, as you put it. Like the amount of white supremacists you've met, spent time with. I mean,
isn't that crazy how, like, for instance, you mentioned you'd watch Versus God. So that's like 2000, and I think that was filmed maybe in 2003 or something like that.
Wow.
Or 2004, right? And I can't tell you, when I there's a segment in that where I like go to a bunker with the Ku Klux Klan. I can't tell you, when that came on TV, like, because people hadn't thought about the Klan like in 20 years. Like, people weren't obsessed with things like that, like they are now, and white nationalism. People were just so confused. They were like, what the hell? There's still a Klan? Oh my God. And John's hanging out with this Klansman. Holy hell. Like, people were just so freaked out. But look how the world's just caught up, like the backdrop to the world, that now that's just staple. That's staple. Like, it's almost like if you do a list of what are people going to investigate, it's going to be white supremacy. And, you know, it's going to be, and like everyone's like just hanging out with white supremacists now, and everyone's, and even this whole world of like the fringe isn't the fringe anymore. The fringe of like the conspiracy world, and that used to be just, that's like why people like Louis Theroux and me and writers like John Ronson, that's why we had gigs. It's like people were so curious. It was like, oh my God, these guys go off and they go to the fringes and they find out these things and these conspiracies that, God, we haven't even heard of. But now, geez, something's happened. Now it's like, now that's just the mainstream, which is another reason why my new book's about the cigarette industry, because I was like, my beat has been taken by everyone. Everyone's doing my beat now. And that was another reason. Yeah, but it was, I mean, it's even that book's kind of crazy, which, like, another thing that can be kind of lost is that when I started researching that book, Depends What You Mean by Extremist, which I think I started like May 2015. And it was just, the thing was, these lefties were organizing a counter rally because I was saying that skinheads were going to be protesting on the streets of Melbourne. It was like, I can't tell you how like insane that felt. Like, it was like maybe at a stretch, like skinheads in Queensland or whatever. What the hell in inner city douchebag hipster Melbourne, really outside the freaking cafes on Spring Street, we're going to be having these skinheads. So I was like, what the hell is this? And then I just turned up and I was just so fascinated. And I started seeing these ecosystems within the bigger system. Like one of the big, when I say ecosystems, there's like the far right I realized had really changed in the last 20 years. The most notable one being that it become multicultural, kind of funnily enough, where you'd have people with like different agendas making strange bedfellows. So you'd have immigrants, like, people of color who had come to Australia, but they're really evangelical Christians. So so much that they really don't like Muslims. And then you've got these white nationalists who don't like Muslims. So somehow they've joined together.
Yeah,
and
they've worked out their racism in a way.
You have pox with white nationalists both joining together in their kind of trying to attack Muslims or whatever. But then when I started that, I thought the book was just going to be me bumbling around with these fringe players where there's like, well, 8 of them turn up to a pub once a month for their meetings. But for me, that's like interesting enough or whatever, because this was before Trump had announced he was going to run. And this was before Pauline Hanson had announced she's going to make a stage a comeback. So then I'm following these far right players who I just think are totally interesting enough to do a book about, but it's like they're just these fringe dwellers. And then suddenly in the background, like the alt-right, suddenly people start knowing about it, starts becoming this mainstream concept. And then Hillary Clinton talks about the alt-right. And then so the alt-right in Australia like starts getting, oh my God, we're something or whatever. And then they start growing, and then they start feeding off each other, the alt-right and the politicians, like in Australia, Pauline Hanson, and the far right on the street. They're both energizing each other. And in America, the alt-right and Trump or whatever. And it was like, and then it was like this growing and growing in the background. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe how lucky I was that I was like hanging out with the Australian alt-right before they even knew they were the alt-right. And so that was crazy. And, but I think a mistake I made in that book, which I've improved with Puff Piece, is I do think I should have explained things. Like I really, with Puff Piece, I really kind of go, oh, this is a real complicated thing I'm talking about. It's about a cigarette company and their new tech, which they're saying is a healthier alternative to cigarette. It's like, I can barely follow it. So if I can't follow it, why would my readers be able? So I go really slowly, and I'm always explaining exactly where I'm at. Whilst I think with my last book, I was still running along on the energy of like, oh, these just crazy. And I love writing about craziness. And I love it all being off kilter. And I love not really telling the reader what to think or whatever. And which is kind of fine. But I think I went too far with that book. I think that book would have been better with more of a, like, me saying exactly what I mean and exactly, like, and not necessarily thinking I have to always dodge around that, or although it was difficult, because the cool thing about writing about cigarettes and whatever is, and their new Philip Morris's new tech, is that I can say straightly what I'm thinking, and it doesn't come across as lame because I'm talking about something people aren't talking about. Well, so what the hell was I going to say on Depends What You Mean by Extremist? Like at the end of a chapter, go, it was then that I realized that racism is bad. Like, it would be like, shut up.
Do you ever find yourself when you're kind of hanging around these people? I think like one of the big reasons is you seem so likable, and you always find the humor in situations that you can kind of get away with hanging out with people that are just completely polar opposite beliefs or anything. But do you ever find when you're kind of spending time with these like Reclaim Australia people, or even do you ever almost find yourself getting swept up momentarily in kind of their kind of radical beliefs? Because at some points, you're talking about, you're hanging out with these Reclaim Australia people, they're going on and on. I love that one quote you said about how all these Australians are reading the Quran and getting radicalized, but none of them are Muslim. Great quote. But then when you kind of you talk to all these people, then you go hang out with like an ISIS wannabe in Melbourne.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, do you ever kind of almost momentarily thinking like, oh, this is maybe there's something here, and have to snap yourself out of it, and then kind of vice versa with this like Islamophobia and just, but I don't know, like, because I often find myself getting just trying to understand why people think that way. And sometimes it's almost you don't need to give them that much of a benefit of the doubt.
Well, I think part of the reason I don't get angry at these people, well, there's two reasons. Where there's just the storyteller instinct in me, where it's like, well, this is just not going to be a good piece of writing if it's like me talking over people, me getting angry at the obvious things or whatever. So it's like, it's not even like really trying to let them hang themselves. It's more like letting them tangle themselves. You know, like right. For instance, let them talk until it sort of becomes this. They've introduced this tangle of like, well, how exactly are they a white nationalist, but their wife is Asian? So, yeah, I just love hearing people talk, and they tell their backstories and all these freaking tangles. I remember one time when I was ducking around interviewing so many different people for this, depends what you mean by extremists, and there was this one dude. So I kind of like lost, like some of them going so fast, I'm kind of like losing my bearings a bit. And anyway, I'm talking to this one dude who was somehow, you know, he'd come onto my radar, who was the head of one group, and he's there, and he's white, I think, and he's got these tattoos, and he's got some Arabic tattoos that looks like Arabic writing, and other ones that aren't Arabic. I'm just looking down his arms, and I've forgotten. I really just forgot. Hang on, who is it? Is this guy a skinhead, one of those white nationalists who doesn't like Muslims? Or is he like this Muslim dude who's like, because why has he got this Arabic writing on his arm? I was just so confused. So usually the thing that prevents me from becoming radicalized is these people, they don't become, in some ways, like their beliefs don't become more annoying. Like there's like a novelty to their extremism, their extremist beliefs the first time you meet them. And then after that, it pretty soon just becomes really annoying. You know, yeah. That, like, I'm not saying they're annoying or whatever, but their beliefs. I mean, have you ever like read Mein Kampf? I haven't read it all or whatever, but it starts off cool. It's got Hitler talking about his childhood. That's really good. And then when he starts waffling about his beliefs, like the problem isn't it's offensive. Like the problem is it's really tedious. It's like, it's almost like unreadable. It's like, and so these extremists have fairly unattractive beliefs because they're always blaming someone else, and they're usually hypocrites. So they're both, so they're kind of like pompous. So all these sort of like unattractive qualities all come out in their beliefs. And then, but then, I mean, so the side where they're redeemable is that that a lot of them, they're like searching for meaning, and they've gone off the rails searching for meaning, whether that's, you know, someone who's joining ISIS or someone on the far right or whatever. So you do have, like, you know, if you kind of go, oh, this person is searching for meaning and they just got it wrong, then maybe, you know, then there's redemption or whatever. I think it's that in Australia,
you know, when they just get so adamant, and it's just like, it just turns into this real tunnel vision kind of thing. And, you know, you're seeing it more and more. And like the book ends just as like Trump's got in, and you mentioned Pauline Hanson kind of making a comeback. But since kind of the book coming out in 2017, it just seems like there's been this increase. I don't know if I'm just paying more attention or if it's just this big tidal wave of kind of far right extremism, or maybe I'm just seeing it through a narrow lens. But, you know, through Trump and then coronavirus, it's everywhere you look. In like,
and it's
smaller ways,
but it's become so tangled and kind of different to what it was in my book. Like the one thing that's really interesting, because it was never that big in America. Like, people don't know this. In America, their far right was dead against or focused on Jews being the puppet masters. And then through that, they didn't like Mexicans and they didn't like black people, right? And the far right in America, even at its peak of the alt-right, they weren't really that focused on Muslims. So Australia had a very different experience because our far right decided to use Muslims as the backdrop for trying to pitch their views. And I'd say they were trying to do that because the far right in Australia, at least, they're always trying to hitch their ride to things that have more acceptability than their neo-Nazism, which is everything. So, for instance, they could see that on like current affairs shows, there was like, stories about halal certification and is it bad? And then there's also, you know, like, because there's like terrorism, sometimes there's like legitimate, you know, news stories or whatever and about, Islamic terrorism or whatever. So they're like, oh my God, this is something that's acceptable to discuss in the mainstream. So that's why I reckon in Australia, they lent into Islam, the far right, when I was writing that book, because it was like something that they could pretend they could pretend they were like, it was like, you know how you've got Dick Smith and he's really concerned about jobs going overseas, and so we're like that, except but they're Nazis. And but then it was like they tried to make out they were just like, listen, are you concerned about terrorism and stuff? And so they were trying to make out like they were just normies or something like that. But in America, for whatever reason, it was never really focused that much on Islam. And I think part of the reason for that is the American far right, they're isolationists. So they're like, for instance, they're not really for the military. They're against the military because they're like, part of their thing is America shouldn't be an empire. America, like, we shouldn't go overseas and be fighting wars and for other countries. So it just becomes like this tangled thing that almost like I imagine anyone listening is like, oh, that's too weird. I don't understand it. But so in this way, they didn't really have they kind of agreed with parts of like when Muslims were saying, well, why is America coming into and going into Arab and Persian and Muslim lands with their troops or whatever? Like, the far right in America was like, yeah, we agree with you, Muslims, or whatever. So it was like, but anyway, so one of the strange things or not strange things, but interesting things is, yeah, it's even in Australia, focusing it on Islam has really gone down. And things just change so fast. It's really hard. And I'm not even focusing on it at the moment. So there's just stuff I kind of pick up when I'm spooling through the Drudge Report or something like that, or Twitter, or something like that. And that, so one of the things I've noticed, which I thought was kind of interesting, is that if you're Muslim and you want to draw attention to Islamophobia, the way to do it now, because at the moment we're living in a thing where everything's been cast by a racial lens, is you don't go, oh, people are bigots against Muslims, people are Islamophobic. You don't go that. What you have to do is you have to say, us Muslims, we're people of color. And so we're part of the people of color who are being screwed over. And it's like, has to be delivered through that lens to sort of like have breakthrough and have sort of like an audience understand it or being sympathetic to you. Because I saw this thing on Drudge Report the other day where it was talking about how Apple has censored the Quran app in China. And so if we had a more sophisticated take on the world, surely that would be like, what a kind of solid gold example of like Islamophobia. Like, what the hell are you like taking away their like that? Surely we lefties should be outraged by that. And, you know, like, but it's just too hard. It's like the Muslims in China are going to have to figure out some way to frame themselves as we're the Black Americans of China, and the Chinese Communist Party, they're the Donald Trump white people or something of China. And that's why it's bad that our Quran has been censored. But yeah, so it's just, I don't know, it's so crazy. And with this coronavirus, it's real, and the conspiracies around that, and how again, I feel like people, you've got both neo-Nazis and white nationalists who are seeing this as an opening to try to, cover themselves. Like, it's like, oh, we're sympathetic with this, and why not kind of join us? Because
Yeah, well,
and
that's been what's really kind of bugging me through a lot of this. We've got this kind of, I don't know, freedom movement, if you want to call it that, more like anti-lockdown, anti-everything related to COVID movement. But I've been paying quite a bit of attention to this bloke who you cover quite a bit in your book, Avi Yemeni, and he's just reinvented himself again as this voice of injustice throughout this entire pandemic, and he actually features quite a lot in your book. You hung out a fair bit about him. Like, what's your impressions of this guy? Is he, because you were training with him and stuff? Is he a buddy of yours, or like it's quite a, like, I don't know, alarming character?
You definitely have a lot of people who are they're recasting themselves for the new situations. And so that's what's kind of confusing about trying to work out what's going on with these lockdown movements, these freedom movements, these conspiracy movements, because it just seems like it's, even with, I mean, these are a bit of a controversial take or whatever, but I also feel that with that what was that thing, that raid on the Capitol, the insurgency on the Capitol or whatever, like, it was, people just get caught up in things. And I reckon it's really credible to say that there are people within these movements. I'm not talking about the leaders so much, but like people, and they're confused and they're wrong, but they're not there as like, oh my God, I'm a neo-Nazi and I hate Jews and I hate black people or whatever like that. Like they really are just confused. And I even take that to the extent of, because you have people, if listeners don't know, I'm Jewish, but so you have people who go along with yellow stars that Jews will put on Jews during the Holocaust to identify them. And so you have these anti-vaxxers and these people in these freedom movements and anti-lockdown people, and they're like, I'm going to wear a yellow star because we're getting targeted like the Jews are.
Really?
And like, obviously it's like offensive and it's silly or whatever. But even in that case, I'm not sure they're trying to be, I think they're just, I really reckon they're not coming from it from a like, oh, I hate Jewish people and that's why I'm doing this. And having said that, Jesus, there's plenty of anti-Semitism out there. So I'm not denying that or whatever. I'm just saying in this particular case, and I just bring that up to sort of like talk about how confusing it is to try to unpick this sort of like COVID. Like I feel like even far right's not quite the right word for it, because like, why are they, why are they far, like exactly why are they far right or whatever? It's a very strange situation. It used to be a lot easier, man. Let me tell you, when I was young, there was the right, there was the left, corporations were right wing, the counterculture was left wing, the offensive people were left wing, the offended people were right wing. everything was like a lot easier back in my days, son. So you have to exist in this confusing time, which wasn't as much fun as when I was a kid.
Well, it is great to kind of hear your humorous takes on it throughout the book, because I think that's one thing everyone really kind of needs. And that's one thing you really do, is you take on the heaviest subjects that are, I mean, even in John Safran Vs God and Race Relations, you're constantly like playing with the Israel-Palestine conflict, which is, horrific, but you just bring these like absurd, hilarious kind of takes on them, or sketches to it. It's
I think,
great.
I think when I don't know how much is conscious and how much is uh, more after the fact. I go, oh, I did that thing or whatever. But when I was very small, I used to watch Marx Brothers films with my dad. So the Marx Brothers are these black and white comedy troupe. You probably know Groucho Marx. He's got a cigar, and he's the kind of guy. Even if you don't know him, you see the face and you go, "Oh, that face" or whatever. And there's Harpo Marx. He doesn't talk. He just squeaks on a horn, and he's got a golden afro. You've got Chico Marx. Anyway, there's the three of them, and they're always like they're like slapstick or whatever. But I noticed with their films, they always set up a sort of a pompous or serious situation, or uh, before they kind of like went all slapstick, and you needed that bit. So like Night at the Opera, like so you set up how the opera is really posh and high class and highbrow, and all the people there very sophisticated and uptight or whatever. So you invest time in all that, and then when they come in, so then when Groucho comes in, you're like, oh my god, and it just makes it so much funnier. And then other like I think they're so much funnier than like Abbott and Costello or the Three Stooges, because they set up this whole serious situation in which their silliness comes in. So I kind of feel like I instinctively picked that up when I started doing docos about how religion is something very serious, and you just not, it just makes the things I do just seem like, oh my god, in such a sort of a better way than if I was just silly, or if that seriousness wasn't there. So because I do remember this woman saying to me, she goes, oh, when I watch your TV stuff, when there's like the wide shot at the start and it's like a mosque or a temple or a synagogue or whatever, it's like, and then like you walk into shot and you're walking towards it, she goes, oh my god, it feels so uncomfortable in my stomach or whatever. So I really feel like, yeah, I do need this sort of serious footing or something, backdrop with that, like that, of like doing what the Marx Brothers do, set up how the opera is very important and sophisticated and da 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 da. And I feel like I need to do that for my silly stuff to work. And
Right.
even in this latest book, Puff Piece. So then, obviously, I mean, another example of that is, of course, like hang out with the clan, and hang out with dangerous people. Like that's really serious or whatever. But even in Puff Piece, where I do like all this thorough journalism, I really feel like the thorough journalism in it is sort of like creating the important backdrop for me to then allow me to be silly and play around in it. And I really felt when I was just doing all the journalism and just making sure it was all thorough, and I was finding out new things and everything. I was, even if it was just subconscious, I reckon that was me sort of going, I need to have this for the fun stuff to work. I can't, like I guess in Puff Piece, I could have made it a bit simpler. Just go, cigarettes kill people or something, and then do shtick about that. But the silly shtick works so much better, because the journalism's so thorough and dense or whatever. Like, so yeah, so I'm a kind of exploiting journalism to be, so I'm being a good journalist so I can be silly.
It is great that you're kind of jumping back into the topic of cigarettes is a funny one, and you kind of point this out. I'm pretty early on in the book, but
Yeah.
we're like currently dealing with a public health crisis with the pandemic and everything. But everyone completely accepts cigarettes. I mean, you say that, what is it, like a year? I think you say at the start of the book that it kills a bit over a Holocaust every year, kind of.
Yeah.
Like
Holocaust and a
8 million
quarter
people.
each year.
Like, it's
And yet,
insane.
52 million people die of everything each year. So everything is 52 million people. Out of that,
Right.
8 million, 8 million out of 52 million people who die each year is cigarette related. Yet it's like somehow, because Philip Morris, they're the Marlboro people, because they just win on all levels. Somehow the they that both happens, and also we think like the cigarette issue is like this boring, dead, bygone era issue. So like, oh, great, John. Why don't you grow some sideburns and put on some bell-bottom trousers while you investigate cigarettes? Oh, thanks, John. Great. Oh, cigarettes. Oh, cigarette companies. So how does that? So Philip Morris somehow, just because they have all the luck in the world, they've even got that on their side that people think it's a dated issue when it's clearly not a dated issue. It's very much of the zeitgeist for the hearse drivers driving these people to the cemeteries. Very zeitgeist issue for them. Very zeitgeist for the cancer cells growing in the bodies of people who smoke cigarettes, and for the nurses plugging in the ironed lungs at the hospital. Very zeitgeist issue for them. But for some reason, everyone thinks it's a dated issue.
But you always point out, you know, hypocrisies in society, which I love, and even just starting this new book does make me think about, you know, the massive focus for the last 2 years that we've had on public health, that the whole planet has come to a standstill. Yet, you know, cigarettes just completely go through.
Yeah.
Also, the anti-vaxxers are so precious about experimental drugs going into the body, yet they'll probably light up a cigarette. And that's kind of one argument I've often said to like conspiracy theorist friends, is like, you know, there's all this worry about these secret plots for depopulation stuff, yet you've got a company like Philip Morris or any cigarette company that they literally, their goal is to addict you and then ultimately kill you. They're just selling death sticks, and that's completely accepted by society. Like, do you think cigarettes should be legal, or do you like what?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, I'm, you know, people should be warned about them and stuff. I mean, this is where like, so there's two levels to this. One is what do I personally think, and then there's also, I live in a society, and maybe I'm not the one to make this decision because I'm just you know, like maybe it is good that there's people more hardline than me. So like just me personally, like, yeah, it's like if people want to smoke, they can smoke. You know? But then maybe that's the wrong attitude to have. And maybe, and you know, I had this ex-girlfriend who would say to me, she'd go, "Oh, John, you just have all these like, hey, do what you want things because you're not an addict or whatever." And I think we're talking about like heroin or something. She goes, "You don't know what it's like to grow up where, you know, you have people in your friendship circle and they take heroin and everything. And it's easy for you because you grew up without that, John, or whatever." So I don't know, maybe there should be some hardline dictatorship of like banning cigarettes. I definitely wouldn't, you know, I'd definitely go along with society and say, well, society has decided cigarettes should be banned and I'm a part of society. And this is I'm not going to die on the hill of, hey, cigarettes are really bad and they're going to kill you. But
Yeah,
if you want.
yeah,
But yeah, generally speaking, it's like, and also I can't be a hypocrite in that. I mean, you'll see in the book, like I just put in my mouth anything that's put in my mouth. So I've really somewhere along the line, I've really lost the right to have like some high moral ground of you know, telling people they can't smoke or whatever.
yeah.
It's just more telling them, you know, oh, this is how Philip Morris is trying to trick you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a difficult one because I totally, you know, I just think, look, if you want to smoke, smoke. However, there is like a deep psychological plan embedded in the product to get you hooked and literally just make people addicted. I mean, if they were non-addictive, maybe that would be you know, if we could remove the chemicals that really just hone in on addicting you, that would possibly be an answer without you know, getting rid of cigarettes altogether. But yeah, it is a funny subject that's just accepted by all, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I should have looked into that. Like, why isn't anyone? There's people who like in the vaping who like sort of like set up a process of like, there's this much nicotine in your first vaping pod, and then as the months go on, decrease the nicotine, and then you'll be vaping without any nicotine, and then maybe you can put the whole thing aside. So there is that in vaping, but yeah, you're right. There's not that in cigarettes. Yeah, where's this? Not where's this low nicotine cigarette?
Yeah,
Yeah, why
yeah.
wouldn't they do that?
Don't ban the tobacco, just ban the additives or whatever that's in them. But I don't know. Hey. Hey, I'm sure you've been asked this many times, and it's going back a long time ago. But when I first watched John Safran versus God,
Is this you going to try to, like in this roundabout way, try to trick me into talking about the exorcism episode?
yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to do.
Everyone,
I left
yeah,
that
because everyone
show
does that.
being so confused, and I'm sure you've
Yeah,
been
well,
logged, but
no, because so I got exercised, and then
it's so intense that
I and then people got annoyed because I didn't explain what happened, and people were like, and so what I reckon possibly I just got hypnotized or whatever. But like, it's not like, you know, like I've never acted before or after, so it's not like I pretended I couldn't act the entire time leading up to that episode, and I've continued the fakery for afterwards of pretending I can't act. But just for that one episode, I just worked out how to give an Academy Award winning performance. So it wasn't that. I wasn't like faking it, but he probably, I mean, you know, I'll go along with you. He hypnotized me.
did it have a big
So
effect on you, kind of after it was all done and dusted, releasing it, looking back, like, because it looks very much like you're completely out of control. Like, I mean, even
yeah,
whatever happened, like, did that have a kind of lasting effect on you?
nah, people have told me I need another exorcism. So, so I wish it did have a lasting effect on me, but yeah, it's just you can only do it once, really. And
More psychologically, not necessarily about being purified or anything, but just actually
oh yeah,
seeing
well,
being
it was definitely
manipulated.
good because no, it was definitely good, like being able to scream, like giving yourself permission to just scream and scream. So it was sort of, yeah, it was like a fun way and very satisfying way to kind of release your inchoate, I mean, you're sort of like your kind of like your muddy stress that's like floating around you. And so yeah, it was good. I'd love to
Mm.
scream again. I recommend exorcisms for everyone.
Well, I also listened to your podcast series on John Safran versus the occult, and there's
Oh
another
yeah,
exorcism in that with that Muslim lady and the
yeah,
getting rid of the jinn.
yeah.
And I mean, yeah, my rational brain just thinks like all rubbish, but then you hear the story. It's really compelling. It's extremely kind of compelling hearing this woman explain her whole experience, then getting exercised. I mean, it's pretty intense. But yeah, I was wondering, kind of linking it with your experience, whether and focusing so much on religion throughout all your work, like what are your kind of thoughts on like, I don't know, entities entering people? Is it like, what's going on?
I don't,
It's pretty.
I just don't, I don't know. I mean, I hope it's true that they do. I mean, but you know, the atheists make some fairly compelling cases that, but I personally hope it's true, and I'm happy to operate as if it's true.
Mm.
So, um, but yeah, like it's hard to argue with these skeptics because they, um, but I don't know. I feel like we've been less people like really are down on religion a bit, but I feel like some problems, like just say all these, like even like we are talking about like these white nationalists in Australia looking for meaning or whatever, and all these right wingers turning up on the streets, like they just need some meaning in their life. And I kind of feel like they have to turn up to church each week. They'd be like, maybe they'd be like, they'd get it there, and then they wouldn't become these violent nationalists or whatever. So yeah, that's the problem with kind of being dark on religion and just saying, oh, you know, close down the churches and all that stuff, is that there's just going to be a whole, like people are just still going to be looking for meaning. And then where are they going to go? They're going to go to these dangerous extremist groups in some cases. Like that,
Yeah,
yeah, they're not going to. So be careful what you wish for.
right. I mean, even like with that lady who got exercised, I think at the very end, you're kind of talking, weighing up, could it be mental illness or what? But I wonder whether it's one of those things that if she can now actually put it on that gin spirit or whatever, is that
Yeah.
necessarily a bad thing? If that helps her get through
No,
it,
of course not.
get
No.
over that, then
Well,
what is the
that's
problem
what
with that?
that's what I've heard from psychologists over the years is that you can engage with someone on their reality,
Mm.
and so yeah, totally. So it's like if a person's grown up in where there's a belief system where yeah, the entity in them is demonic or whatever, and then you can help get that out of them, then sure, why not?
Mm.
So yeah, I'm very pro exorcism. I've got a whole I've read but I reckon I've read more exorcism books than most. In fact, I'm really sure I'm sure most people have read zero or whatever. I've got like I'm looking at the thing, one, two. Let's have a look here. These are just ones that are oh my god. They don't even fit into two hands. These are just all these books about this isn't like about the devil or religion. These are all specifically about exorcisms and their look, I've got both issue 1 and issue 2 of An Exorcist Tells His Story and Exorcist More Stories by Gabrielle Amorth, who was the Vatican's exorcist. There's a bit of a trend, I think maybe in the late 60s or something, around that time that what's that book then film that came out? Rosemary's Baby came out, where there was a bit of a kind of pulp kind of exorcist story. See this one, when's this book from? Why am I no well, this is as late as 1987. I thought it would have been earlier. Like Malachi Martin, The Possession and Exorcism of 5 Contemporary Americans Hostage to the Devil. And yeah, there was like, so I went through a stage where I was like reading all these books about people's exorcism stories and watching all these exorcism films, and feel like it's a bit, people aren't into it as much anymore. I don't know what happened.
Is there any within the kind of the Jewish religion?
Totally, yes. Yeah, definitely. One of my favorite books, which I've lost or someone's borrowed, is exactly about that. It's about how there used to be Jewish exorcisms, because Judaism used to be I mean, it still is for the really religious guys. It's like really grounded in like ritual and mysticism and superstition, like so many things that when I grew up, I just didn't ruminate over them that much. You know how, like, for instance, if you're Christian, oh, there's a Christmas tree or something, and you just say, oh, okay, there's a Christmas tree, and like you just don't think about it. So there's all these things in Judaism, like the mezuzah on the door, which is this parchment where, like, in Hebrew, there's a scripture written on it, and you have it on the doorpost, and that's mystical. It's like what the hell is that? That's like crazy. It's like like Judaism is when you read the Torah. I recently read the 5 books of Moses, a new translation or whatever, and there's pretty much like voodooism in it, like something that's more equated to like for instance, and when I say that, I mean they'll talk about the building of the temple, and they'll say, oh, this is how the temple has to be built, like when, and they're talking about the temple in Israel, and it becomes it's like when the Messiah comes, the temple's going to be built or whatever. But anyway, they lay out like what the rules of the high priests are there, and they've got these instructions, and it's like it's about like ripping the heads off pigeons and rubbing the blood on the wall. It's like, it's so insane, and it's just yeah. So Judaism's just like has become really, because it's become so cultural as opposed to religious, and because people think Jews have just kind of assimilated a bit more into the normal normie culture or whatever like that. It's easy to forget that it was like, it is just another like vivid, exciting basically voodooism. And so there definitely was. There used to be exorcisms. And one of the things I remember from that book is that it was talking about how sometimes a Jewish exorcist and a Muslim exorcist, they'd cooperate because to try to confuse the demon. So for instance, if there was a demon in a Muslim dude, maybe the Muslim exorcist would get the Jewish exorcist over, and then the Jewish exorcist is kind of doing his ritual over the Muslim, and it's going to confuse the devil inside because or the demon, because the demon's like used to the Muslim dude and like, what's this strange thing of this Jewish dude doing it? So there used to be interfaith exorcisms. We should reintroduce that. That'd be good. Interfaith exorcisms.
That really actually did come to mind listening to your occult chat with that Muslim lady, and because I always just thought, I don't know, I thought exorcisms, Christianity, and then I was, when she was getting exercise, I was kind of thinking, well, good thing she's got a Muslim exorcist that seems to get this jinn out of her. And I was actually thinking whether this interfaith exorcism could actually exist.
Yeah, it'd be good.
Yeah.
When I was reading the Bible, it's so hilarious how it's wild. First of all, the Bible is wild. Like you have to sort of understand that it was written in a previous time. So there's knots and things that don't make sense. And also things drag on a bit more than if it was edited today or whatever like that. But within that, it is just so insane, like the violence and the sex and all this stuff that you just, like if you just grow up and you just, there's sometimes you see like on kids' TV shows like Noah's Ark or, David and Goliath and all this sort of like real easy stuff or whatever. It's like, no, the Bible is like insane. And the way it's kind of like glossed over for kids, like, oh, here's your picture stories from the Bible, and here's like a dove over the ark as God has, and really glossing over that God just genocided all those people. And there's also, God, what is that one? I don't want to talk about. There's a real like salacious sex one that where a woman hides. Like she uses her body to kind of like hide stolen objects and stuff like that. It's really, it's really full on. Anyway, so I've read so the Torah is the first 5 books of Moses, but now I've got to move on to the other books. So some of the stuff you think is in the Bible, like isn't actually in the Bible, like it's not in the Torah, like things like David and Goliath is actually, or Samson and his hair. That's actually in like later books of the Bible.
Right.
Anyway, who cares?
Well, talking about, you kind of mentioning the craziness of the Bible and just, how many miracles and just in, really crazy stories. And then, compared to like certain cults like Scientology or something where they believe evil Lord Xenu was, took everyone's souls and dropped them in a volcano and something. But, I mean, the more we lean in the direction of science, I mean, there's no reason to believe there couldn't be aliens out there at all. So it's funny how we just quickly do label the the absurdity of Scientology.
Can I stand up for the Torah? Which is,
Sure.
That's the 5 books of Moses, the Jewish. So it's like that's the Old Testament, like, and then the New Testament is Jesus and all that stuff. So what's really Zen, that's probably the wrong word, but what's really like a bit safer about the Torah is, even though it's violent and hypocritical and all this stuff like that, is you're largely allowed to take it that way. So for instance, you don't have to think that Abraham or Noah or Moses, you don't have to think they're like good people. Like, you definitely like that. Like, you don't have to think they're not flawed people. And you're even into a limit, you're even allowed to think that of God, really. So it means you're not like having to like always reverse engineer into the horrific scripture into something good and pretending it's not there, which I've noticed some other religions. So even the New Testament, it's like Jesus has to be perfect.
Right.
And so therefore all these things that kind of make that a bit clunky for it to work, then it's like you have to get agitated by that. Whilst in Judaism, like Moses, like who's more important than that? Wouldn't he be like one of the lead holy prophets or whatever? You're allowed to think he's a flawed person and even not a good person in some ways. And so
Yeah.
you
Okay.
just don't have that stress. You don't have that stress. Or the other one, like with Islamic scripture, where it's like, Muslims get wound up because people are going, oh, well, I read this thing about Muhammad in your own scripture, and he did this, and he married a 6-year-old, and then it's just it's kind of like it's irritating to like a devout Muslim. So it's like, whilst there's plenty of people marrying 6-year-old, we're not marrying 60-year-olds, but it's like, I think there's definitely incest, for instance, or implied incest, I think maybe, and yeah, just all this stuff. But you don't have to, it's not like, oh, okay, well, that was good or something. It's just like a bit more like stress-free, even if you're a devout Jew, let alone not a devout, because obviously if you're not devout, you can just go, oh yeah, well, it's just bullshit or whatever. But even if you're a devout Jew, it's just not as stressful, the bad stuff in the Torah, because you're allowed to, you don't have to worship these characters, or it's not a condition of entry that like, oh, Moses was such a great man that he never made a mistake or whatever like that. Like there's even like fights with God, like holy rabbis, who renowned rabbis, they're always like sort of like picking little holes in the Torah, and God said this here and God said that there. And so, yeah, it's chill.
I've always struggled to kind of understand religion, which like kind of shows the hypocrisy in myself. So I've always just thought, like, as I was young, religion bad. There'd be so many less wars without religion when I was young, and as I've gotten older, I've kind of like had my own little, I guess, spiritual inquiries with New Age spiritualism, or Ram Dass is really kind of my guy. This psychedelic.
Who's your guy?
Ram Dass. He's this. He was Timothy Leary's right-hand man back in the 60s, but then he went to India. Yeah, and then kind of got right into Hinduism and Buddhism and things like that. So I can already just see like the hypocrisy of myself thinking, judging religions, but I found this niche one that works for me, which is kind of,
that's good.
Which is absurd in a way. But I actually think going through so much of your work, it is a great access point for someone who's never quite really understood religion like myself, and it actually has made me much more curious to actually learn more about, reading the staple religions, like reading the Bible, or reading the Torah or the Quran would be fascinating things to kind of
I read the there's this book in India in Hindu scripture called the Ramayana, and there was do I have it? And I've got this one that was written for, like, I'm sure if you're a proper Hindu, you're like, John, you just read this stupid one that was made for idiots in the West. But regardless, it's like amazing. It's such an amazing story. And scripture can just be like the real, scripture, the problem with scripture is also that like, what's the problem with old books as well, where you have to get in your head they were written in a different time, and where people were desperate for material, and so things drag on a bit. Like I hear Charles Dickens is quite the chore to get through, because it's like, yeah, but you got to understand, like, people have to wait like 4 months to get a book, and then they're going to really relish all the detail and all that stuff. And then there's also, I guess, the other thing with scripture is often it's pieced together from different sources or whatever. So like that's almost like the main thing I'd say before going into scripture, is like reading a bit about the context in which it was written, so you're not getting annoyed by how it's dragging on, or it's repeating itself, or there's a contradiction here or there. One of the Bible I read, the 5 books of Moses I read, it's got a commentary by this guy called Robert Elter. And so, and the really good thing about the commentary is you can look down at it and just go, oh, I'm not mad. Like, because like it will say something like them, like it'll refer to God as them, and they'll be like going, I don't understand that, because is them referring to God, but God's one, or what? Or is them referring to the Israelites mentioned in the sense? Like, you're getting confused, and you just look down to the footnote, and it just says, people get confused here because it says there, and go, okay, great, I'm not mad, or just all the little like something happened 5 pages ago where Moses had a red hat, and now he's got a, now he's got a back to the front baseball hat, or no, whatever it is. Like, there's this little difference or whatever, and then just look into the footnotes, and they just go, oh, people notice that Moses has 2 different hats, or and it's like, oh my god, so I'm not mad or whatever. Yeah, so that's a kind of the real stressful part about reading old scriptures. It's just it's like trying to understand or get your head around the long dragged on bits that aren't as interesting or don't appear to be as interesting, and also all the little contradictions. But then the other thing is, I just say I'd join just some group, and there's no shortage of groups in the real world and online. Like, I reckon that'd be a less stressful way to get through some old religious book, is like reading it with others or reading it with an expert teacher or something like that, because then you'll just you won't go mad.
Yeah. What's the best religion, John? You've read so many of the scriptures and stuff. What's the best one? What wins?
I do like. I wish there was more. I feel like I haven't got enough guilt. I feel like Judaism's pretty cool, but I just wish there was more guilt, because I feel like I needed a bit more guilt in my life. And Hinduism, I really like the Ramayana, so that's kind of cool.
It's pretty trippy.
Yeah, I'm not really into any kind of sect that tries to be normal. I'm just kind of thinking, you're kind of like defeating the purpose of. I always have that fight with Father Bob, where he was always like trying to like, hey man, make Catholicism more accessible. So he's not going to wear the priest's robe. He's going to turn up in his Adidas tracksuit or something. And it's like, no, people want that. Like, people want a bit of theater or whatever. Like,
right.
Yeah, I don't know. So the boring ones, I feel like really bad. I'm not going to say it. I feel like it seems a bit mean to say what the worst religion is, but there's a certain religion that believes that you shouldn't try to affect the world, and it just kind of ends like, it's so
as in everything is how it should be.
No, like, you're not meant to vote, for instance, because God should take care of things, and
right.
And you really got to be careful about trying to affect things, because then you're doing what God should do. And I've tried to do a story on this religion a couple of times, but each time it's just too boring, because nothing happens. I was driving with someone in the car and they got lost, and I said, are you allowed to look up the Melways, or is that like, or should God just guide us forever or whatever? And so yeah, that's the worst religion, that one. Which I
okay, that one, sure. When you are like,
what I'm talking about, religion where you can't vote. Yeah.
When you are like digging in on these, I mean, I assume you must get a lot of backlash, because like in your book on extremism, your phone just seems to be always going off by randoms. Like, how are people? First of all, how are people getting your number and just contacting you? And
especially in social media, it's pretty easy. Like,
yeah, okay.
Like, I'm on open on all channels or whatever.
Then, do you worry? Do you worry about your safety when you kind of, you're covering things that people have dedicated their whole lives to, or you're, because a lot of the things
I mean, I just have to kind of approach it and be a bit naive, where it's just kind of go along with that thing of, well, like, really, what are the chances?
Yeah.
And so far that's worked for me.
Yeah.
Although someone, I think according to one white nationalist, I nearly got thumped whilst writing that book. He contacted me after the book came out and said, when we were up in Bendigo, they were going to hose you down, and I stopped them. So,
Yeah.
and I was just thinking, God damn it. Like, the bruises would have healed by now, and that would have been a killer chapter. Thanks a lot, jerk.
They all seem to like you though a bit, you know. They claim that they don't like you in the moment, but then they'll buy you tequila shots, and then they'll then they'll
I
kind of
know.
welcome you
Well, I guess
in.
I'm just like, yeah, I guess I do listen to, but like, because I am interested in this. I
Yeah.
like I do find it all interesting. So I think they kind of like that someone's listening to them. It's all
Yeah.
become like crazy now. Like, there's this new like woke rule where it's like, don't platform
Mm.
Nazis and stuff like that. When, like, what does that even mean? Uh, so what? Just sit on Twitter and shriek, but like, don't leave your house and investigate. Like, that's what it means. I really am dead against that. I
Yep.
believe in I believe the entertainment value of everything increases if there's a Nazi there. So I'm like, platform more Nazis or whatever. No, it's like, I get what they're saying. They're saying that don't, like, you can't like just let people unquestioningly spread their um their racism or whatever. So I kind of get that, but I do feel like I generally generally think a lot of what people write about is everyone's just trying to get attention and have an angle. And so I really feel like shrieking about platforming Nazis is just someone trying to have an angle. Like,
Well,
yeah,
it's
that's why I like leaving the house. Like I'm a big fan. That's why I'm against coronavirus. It's stopping me from leaving the house, because
yeah.
I'm a big fan as a writer, as a storyteller, of leaving the house, because then you can just explore things, you can let things speak for themselves. There's all that. It's not just, when you don't leave the house, you're just there, but you want to be a writer. You're just there. But all you can do is have this, almost like this arms race of being the most histrionic kind of person, and like,
Mm.
to what end? And like on some surface level, you're moral, like, yeah, well, I don't know, whatever. So that's the only option you have left. It's like, you have to yeah, like if I go down to a neo-Nazi rally and I let them speak and say things that are contradictory and ironic, and then I've got my humorous little quips or whatever, like, you get to understand their world, you get to understand where they're coming from, and you get to understand why they're ridiculous. And there is activism in it, because you're making these people who
Mm.
don't want to look ridiculous look a bit ridiculous or whatever, right? But if you just never leave the house, all you can do is like, Nazis
Yeah. La la la
need
la la.
they need to be punched. Oh, you have a problem with me saying punching that? Oh, are you a Nazi? Oh, and just like everything has to be like, it's like, and I believe Donald Trump's son, Barron, is that his name?
Yeah.
Barron? Or
Yeah.
I think Barron, I think he should be dropped down a well and eaten by ants. Oh, really? Oh, you've got a problem with that, do you? What? It's like everything has to just be this like hysteria, like, that gets nowhere and isn't as cool as my stuff. So I just don't, I just don't believe this thing of like, yeah, this whole no platform thing, like, don't platform, is just basically writers who are too lazy or scared to leave their house and investigate everything, trying to
Mm.
like hang shit on those of us who do. And the other thing that's kind of annoying is that all these people think they know things. Like, once they know something, they think they've always known it. It's like, no, 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 you know that because other journalists went out on the streets
Right.
and
Right.
investigated it. Like, I noticed that when I was briefly doing court reporting, when I was a true crime writer, that you'd have all these people on Twitter like hanging shit on like the headline or some paragraph in an article written about some court thing that was written by either a Murdoch journalist or a Fairfax journalist or something like that. And they'd all be sort of like so high and mighty and pompous and so like attacking this article, like, no, that's not how, and never was it factored into the fact that, hey, you only know about this because that journalist was down there. You did not know about this in any other way. And so like, surely that should moderate your kind of like opinion. Like, it's not like, because otherwise, if this journalist didn't go down there, you'd know zero about this because you don't leave the house because you're lazy or lack curiosity or you're scared. And so
But no, I couldn't agree more. But like covering things, people like Nazis and stuff, what I find fascinating is it's kind of like fascination. Well, for me, fascinations in cults and or even serial killers, like to a lesser extent, but trying to work out where they went wrong, and also trying to figure out, like, could this happen to me? And I guess that's why I asked you earlier, like, do you ever find yourself temporarily being swayed by these extreme kind of arguments? Because it's like, where are people going wrong? Why, like, and why is this increasing? I
don't think people who don't have other options, like, people kind of throw themselves around a bit until they get traction somewhere. I mean, even me as an artist or whatever, like, you kind of feel like, I've felt out this, maybe I'll be a rapper, maybe I'll do this or that, and what kind of works or whatever. So I just reckon there are people who are kind of fine. They're not fitting into any other niche in society or whatever, or just, and then they, especially with the leaders, so I'm not talking about the people in these groups, but the leaders of these groups. You have like young men, like maybe they're in their mid-20s, and the ship has sailed of them kind of getting authority in some other sense. Like, for instance, like if they went to become a doctor or an architect or something where they'd be kind of respected in the community, like that ship sailed. And then also they haven't become a plumber or a builder or whatever, like that like or some other profession where, like, by this stage in their life they'd have built sort of status where they get respect, or have respect, people respecting them or whatever. So they're like, and so this sort of like starting up a little grouplet, a little neo-Nazi grouplet is this sort of like shortcut for being kind of a king in a very small kingdom. And so I think there's that element to it. But yeah, there's so many layers to why these groups are working or whatever, and it's in so much as they do work. But and it's hard to sort of know how. I think they are dangerous because even if there's not a lot of them in a group, you don't need a lot to, like groups that are like prone to terrorism. Like, you don't need 20 people for that. You need like a couple of people. And there's been, even in Australia, there's been like some close calls. Like, we mightn't have had like one kooky person he's not in my book. It's a bit of a bummer really for my book, because I saw him at rallies and he did want to speak to me, but I was just confused and I just had spoken to too many people that day or whatever. But he ended up trying to, he went to court. He was taken to court. He's locked up, and because he was trying in his inadequate way to kind of blow up some anarchists, and it didn't work because he was incompetent. Because he was incompetent, not because he didn't want to do it. There's been like really close calls. Like, even in 2019, this wannabe jihadi, this guy who was a student at Sydney University, I want to say, and he told a court he'd bought a hunting knife to kill Jews on campus. It was like, huh? And for some reason, I was like, obviously, I found this, I found that story interesting, but I found more interesting the fact it didn't become a story. It's like, oh, okay. So for some reason, how's that not interesting or whatever? But but anyway, so it like, there doesn't need to be a lot of people for them to be dangerous. So I do think it is true that they are dangerous, even if you want to argue that there's not a lot of them or whatever.
Yeah. Did you see in The Age the other day, the guy got arrested for burning down a 5G tower, and then the cops went to his house and he had a 1.5 meter by 6 meter hole in his backyard that he planned to kidnap Dan Andrews and hold him hostage
What
there.
the hell? Jesus.
It's like, I think in the last week. And he told the
Man,
cops, like, they're like, what's this hole for? And it's like, well, I was going to get Dan Andrews and put him in there and put him before a kangaroo
far
court,
out.
he said. So, I mean, I found that one particularly funny, just how absurd
It's
it
so
is.
confusing, isn't it? It's like,
Yeah.
like what's going on there? I don't even know how to unpick that. What
Yeah.
about how weird it is where like Pete Evans, that
Oh,
guy
the
who
celebrity chef guy.
celebrity chef, and then
I've been trying to get him on, but he won't respond to me.
he and then he starts posting like it's so I can't tell you how weird it is to me, these things that were just so fringe of the fringe that I was kind of like on my radar, and now they're like just front and center, because it was always a bit like ironic. I used to like when I'd look into these groups that were both far right, but they'd have like some left wing grounding, like for instance, they're environmentalists or
Right.
the vegetarians, and then that whole thing of where does the conspiracies that people you associate with the left, like up until relatively recently, you'd say, oh, these people who are like in Byron Bay who are like into that stuff, they're like left wing, like, but are they? Like, and then like, and then yeah, I noticed this like whatever, like 10 years ago or 15. I was like, oh, it's kind of interesting, really. You got these lefties and they're into these conspiracies, but they kind of, there's a crossover with the righties and their conspiracies. And how does that all work? Like, I noticed that at this bookshop when I used to go to in high school and then at uni or whatever, in the Melbourne CBD, called the Theosophical Bookshop.
Yeah, I remember
and
that
they'd have they'd have these. I noticed you'd start at one side of the shelf and there'd be like a thing on aliens are real or whatever. They're lying to you about aliens on the moon landing. It's like, okay, cool, that's kind of fun. And then it's like, oh, they're lying to you about JFK assassination. It's like, oh, okay, well, a bit more serious, and you know, a life was taken, so sort of like it's not as easy to just kind of laugh it off, but you know, still it's kind of funny, kooky, or whatever. Then the next, it's like they're lying to you about, you know, the JFK assassination and the banks and the Illuminati, and it's like, okay, what's this about the banks or whatever? And it's sort of like and then like as it goes on, and basically by the, you know, as you pretty soon get to it, sort of like it's the Freemasons and the Illuminati did 9/11. It's like the Jews did.
Yeah,
It just
it always goes back to the Jews, doesn't it?
It goes back to the Jews. So I always notice this kind of thing of like things that seem like fun conspiracies and even fun lefty conspiracies sort of like ending up in that dark place or whatever. So yeah, it's really interesting. I could never have guessed this even like 5 years ago. Like the whole thing of like, oh, this guy on MasterChef is going to be posting pictures with Nazi symbolism on his Instagram page.
Yeah.
like why? And then he denies it. Like he goes, oh, I didn't know that was a Nazi symbol. It's like, okay, maybe.
Yeah.
I guess that's like when they deny it, it's always becomes confusing. I was like, well, did he really not know that was a Nazi symbol?
I know. It's that was why I got out of the conspiracy game, because the New World Order started to be referred to as the Jew World Order. I was like, wait, I'm sorry, yes. What was that? What? Want to back up? And yeah, it does. It's so much of it's entrenched in anti-Semitism. I don't know why. I don't know why the conspiracy world. I mean, like you say, most of it's more shallow and it's more fun, but it's when you really like start to pry and dig deep and see like, well, what are they really saying? It does lead to this weird anti-Semitic thing, and I don't know why. Didn't like it.
There's this new tangle, which I don't even know how to untangle. I barely know how to explain it, let alone untangle it, where it's so clear to me that, like, as you say, there is like this racism, so much racism is, and conspiracy is like grounded in anti-Semitism, right? And on the one hand, like the left kind of agree with that, like they wouldn't deny it if on the one hand, but on the other hand, there's been this new reframing of racism, of what racism is and what racism isn't, and how different forms of racism have different heats to them, if that's the right word. And somehow, like, anti-Semitism, like racism against Jews, falls out of that because it's like it's become well, Jews are white, and you can't be racist to white people, and it's like, okay. And how does the fact that like anti-Semitism is like the grounding of these far right groups and of so much racism, how does that match up? Like, it just doesn't match up. They've like 5 years ago or 10 years ago, everyone was just, no one would bother making that. No one would bother. People on the left wouldn't bother going, oh, by the way, yeah, sure, there's anti-Semitism, but you got to understand it's not as bad as anti-black racism because Jews are white. Like, they just wouldn't bother getting into that tangle. But now they do bother getting into that tangle. I'm just so freaking confused and find it really dangerous because it does get because people shouldn't be and like to ground it in like something real or whatever is like you have left wingers. There's been a steady trickle in Melbourne in Australia of like left wingers vandalizing Australian businesses run by Jews and then having like these two get out of jail cards, one being, oh, it's because of the Israel-Palestine conflict. And then if you ease around that, there's this implicit, if not explicit, that there's not heat to that. There's not heat to being racist to Jews because they're white and powerful. It's like, hang on, but the white and powerful, the Jews, like attributing to Jews that they're really powerful, like that's kind of the conspiracy, man. And so, yeah, as I say, it's like this tangle that I barely know how to explain, let alone what the answer to it is. But it's like, I find it really worrying because when it comes to like the right wing anti-Semitism, like everyone's on your side. Like, it's obviously screwed up, but you know, it's not like if a Nazi vandalizes a Jewish business, the left are going to go, well, but a Jew's white or whatever. Yeah. They'll sort of like, they'll stand with the Jews. But yeah, then when left-wing people do it, like just look at how the contours of like how confusing it is. Like, so there's this shop. It is like based on reality, not based. This is reality. So these left-wingers vandalize a Jewish business, saying the owner is part of an international Zionist conspiracy, and because of the Israel-Palestine conflict, right? So he just ran a falafel place in Sydney Road, Brunswick, right? So then
I remember that one.
So look at this. But because the people who did it were left-wing, and it's Jews, and it's Israel-Palestine thing, and Jews are white, somehow it comes out like, well, that's not racism. That's not.
People are like, it's complicated, okay?
Vandalizing a Jewish business in Melbourne, accusing the owner of being part of an international Zionist conspiracy, is not like, oh well, it's complicated. But look how crazy that is, because it's like next door, like a Chinese restaurant. Like, you're not allowed to, according to the left, the same lefties, you're not allowed to like vandalize that Chinese Australian business, you know, in support of the Uyghurs being persecuted by the Chinese government. So you're not allowed to. So you're allowed to vandalize the Jewish business, but not the Chinese business. But it gets even more tangled than that, because if neo-Nazis vandalize the Jewish business, almost with the same rhetoric, if they said, hey, we're neo-Nazis and we're vandalizing this business because the owner's part of an international Zionist conspiracy, you're also not allowed to do that according to the left. So it's like, that's how like the whole thing of anti-Semitism doesn't map with sort of like how the left understands or processes racism or whatever. Is like, you can vandalize the Jewish business, but only if you're left-wing and not if you're a Nazi. And also you can't vandalize the Chinese business next door. So anyway,
is this like this blurring though? It like with this kind of like new wacky extremism that I'm seeing is like, there's been a few articles of like the bleeding of the kind of the new age hippy dippy with the far right, where they're kind of meeting on these issues, and it really does fascinate me. But I think that's like a perfect example of that you just said of these And that's what you do so well, like exposing hypocrisies in society, for the left as much as the right, which I really really appreciate. It's awesome. John, thanks so much for doing this. Like, I really appreciate it. I
Thank
always
you.
really enjoy hearing your insights.
No,
And
great to
also,
talk.
yeah, really looking
Great
forward
to
to
waffle
finishing.
and get my thoughts a bit coherent. I like practicing a few thoughts on you like that. I've been practicing my Jewish shop vandalism thing because I'm confused about it. So I feel like
Yeah,
if I talk it out loud, it will help
yep, great.
untangle it in my head somehow.
I look forward to hearing the rest of Puff Piece, which
Cool.
already really enjoying. And are you working on anything else, or you just kind of like?
Yeah,
I mean, you are.
yeah,
You talk about it,
yeah, yeah. No,
or
I've
yeah.
read. No, oh no, I can't. Well, no, I'm starting my next book already because I've
Mhm.
got and also hopefully it'll probably be a doco type thing, but I can't really talk about that.
Yeah,
But
great.
we shall see that. Yeah. So yeah, basically, thank God I've still got work. Dad, if you listen to this podcast, I've still got 2 more paid gigs lined up. So that's okay.
Awesome. Well, thanks
Okay.
again, mate. I really
Thanks
appreciate
a
it.
lot.
And thanks everyone for listening. Take care. See ya.
See ya. Bye-bye.